Hey, everybody, welcome to the Church Advance podcast. We are so excited this month to be featuring the up and coming launch of Church Advance HQ with myself and Luke. This is going to be exciting, man. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, well, we have to be ready because it's happening. It's happening on September 30th. That's launch day. We've already had several pastors out there kind of sign up, get on the waiting list, but there's still time to reserve your spot, get on the waiting list. Churchadvancehq.com. Let's go.
Yeah, you go do that. And then let me tell you just quickly what we're doing. What is Church Advance HQ? It's really a three-pronged approach to us being more intentional in helping you in your ministry. And so I'm going to give you these three words and we'll unpack them real quick. There's conference, there's coaching, and there's courses. Just like a good preacher, I got those alliterated up. But
You're still a good Baptist
basically,
at
what we're
heart.
saying is this: these are the three things that are included in your subscription-based application to Church Advance HQ, the conference. That's our annual Church Advance conference, February 6th and 7th, 2025, with myself, H.B. Charles Jr., Kurt Skelly, Tyler Prater, and others. Dynamic worship, great conversations, beautiful sunny Florida in February. So when you register for Church Advance HQ and make that subscription, you get an automatic entrance into the conference. That's number one. And so that's worth most of the thing anyways.
Yeah.
We do want you here. I mean, Luke,
Yeah.
we've talked about this 100 times. I mean, it's such a good meeting. Every year it does not disappoint. At least 100 ministry leaders come together in Florida in February for just a great, really conversation and inspiration.
Yep.
And that's what we're doing, and we're looking forward to that. Then we
Yeah.
got.
I was going to say, I'm going to throw this out there. Most conferences are going to charge the fee that we're charging for entry into Church Advance HQ. That's what they charge for the conference alone. So it's totally where, I mean, the Church Advance conference is already a fantastic deal. But what we're charging for Church Advance HQ would be what most churches are going to cost for the conference alone.
I'm
So
blown away
a
at
deal.
a couple things about conferences that I'm affiliated with. The entrance fee is usually very steep, usually actually 5 to 6 times what we charge to come to the Church Advance conference. Our church absorbs most of the cost of the conference just because we want to be a blessing to pastors. And then number two, the fee to set up a display. I almost choked when I heard it. And again, our highest is $500 to be a sponsor of the conference and to have a booth and a commercial and so on and so forth. So we try to make this super reasonable, but it's even more reasonable if you're part of Church Advance HQ. So that's exciting. And then Luke, what's the second thing we got going here? So we got conferences.
We got conferences, and then we have coaching, and we have courses. But Brian, I think what we should do is we should just kind of leave it there, and we're going to tease that in the future. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the features of Church Advance HQ. We're going to take a moment in each episode over these next few weeks to kind of unpack them. But yeah, let's go with that for now. But yes, we also have personal coaching and courses. And yeah, we'll talk a little more in detail about that in a while. But for now, I think let's just get to the main content of this episode.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. And I do want to remind you to make sure that you are following us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you may listen to podcasts. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@churchadvance. And you can actually watch video versions of each episode. We'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review and share this content with other pastors and church leaders. We want to help as many of these folks as we can, and so we'd really appreciate you sharing this episode with your friends. Well, thanks again for joining us as we begin today's episode and continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Brian Sams.
So, I have obviously transitioned, a lot here, both in terms of, my church, of course, But I think for me, it was a lot of personal and internal transitions that led to, you know, public
Yeah, more of
transition.
an yeah. So it was like a personal transition for you that led to as the leader leading your church, essentially,
Yeah, I think
transition.
one of the weaknesses of as we have instructed young men, as we have brought them onto our staffs, as we have educated them, um, sent them out, hired them on our teams, we've almost put them in a box and said, okay, you're 21 to 25 years old. You have to believe everything you're always ever going to believe and practice everything you're always going to ever practice. And you have to have all that settled right now before age 25. Now, Luke, I am 46 years old. Okay. What are you? You're in your 30s, I'm
30,
guessing.
33, Jesus age.
You're-
Boom. Amen.
Okay. Look, how much have you grown and how much have you learned? How much information have you processed? How many experiences have you gone through, good or bad? How
Hmm.
many books have you read? How many sermons have you heard? How many lectures have you encountered that shifted your perspective?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you this: 33. Oh, how should I put this? 23-year-old me would not believe where 33-year-old me is. As in, 23-year-old me will look at 33-year-old me and think that man's a heretic. I mean, that's how
Absolutely.
far that transition for me, that shift has only happened in the majority of it in the past 5 years. You know,
Well, here's what I'm trying to say about it. That is whether we're talking about doctrinal things or not, that is inevitable with anybody that grows up. I mean, you get married, you have children, you have life, you have experiences, you read stuff, you hear stuff. It's part of growth. A 1 year old puppy doesn't look like a 7 year old puppy.
hmm
A newly planted tree doesn't look like a 500-year-old sequoia or whatever, you know.
yeah,
It's growth, development. I think we applaud it in a lot of areas. We would expect a 46-year-old to be a more mature husband, father person, but if that person has grown and developed and matured and learned things in practical ministry or even philosophical things, um, we look at that as bad, and we put a 21-year-old in a position. I mean, I think about honestly when I was at West Coast at the beginning, at least. I mean, we used to actually do this. I don't know. I bet you had to do this when you graduated from West Coast. Dr. Rick Hauk stood up and read a statement to you and said, "If you ever deviate from this, we will take your
yeah,
diploma back,"
yeah.
which
You
of
forfeit your diploma. Yeah.
course,
No,
later.
Brian, hold on. Side note on that. Is this true? I have heard that they have actually removed the King James clause from that. West Coast Baptist College has removed that. I've heard they had. I heard that
Well,
there was somebody who shall
I
remain unnamed on staff that said
actually
you have to change that. Is that true?
okay. Actually, now I haven't been there in 8 years, but I'm pretty sure they eliminated that whole thing because the fact is you can't do that,
Yeah. Maybe that was
and because West Coast is accredited now,
Mhm.
tracks regional accreditation. I was there when we were going through that process, and that was one of the things that came up in the conversations was about that. I mean, you can't legally take somebody's diploma away that they paid for and earned because they shifted, some kind of. Can you imagine Harvard
Yeah.
doing that,
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, you're now a Christian." Anybody that becomes a Christian after they leave Harvard is, you lose
Well, I
your
was going
diploma.
to say the unaccredited Bible college diploma I have from there really carries a lot of weight. So I'm glad they haven't
Absolutely
taken it.
right.
Yeah.
And again, that's a funny whole other. There's a whole mountain of stuff to talk about there,
Yeah.
but I do know that I'm just using that as an example of the pressure.
Hmm.
And it was like this, it was put out like this sacred solemn moment. I just talked to a guy just the other day that went through this exact same thing at ordination, the exact same thing. Um, if you ever use another version besides the King James, you will take your ordination papers away, which again, I understand. Trying to encourage somebody to stay true to the faith. And in that world, that is the faith. But the point I'm making is the pressure that we put on young men creates all this conflict we're seeing today.
Mm.
Um, they struggle because they know what it means, and it completely eliminates creativity and development if you're not willing to let somebody grow and learn in these areas. And then, but what ends up happening, man, is inevitably you can't stop the learning train. I mean, here's a dude standing on the train tracks. A train is running 100, 100 miles an hour going down the tracks. Some dude's learning theology. Going to, he's listening to sermons. He's interacting with other pastors. He's waking up to podcasts and biblical truth, studying the
Hmm.
Bible, and that train starts running.
Yeah.
And there's no way
Well,
you're going to stop it. And I can't tell you how many times I've said this to a guy asking me questions. Well, I can tell you, I'll say, he'll start saying all these things that he's thinking. And I go, well, I'll just go ahead and tell you this. Once the train gets going down the track, you're not going, but you're not going back.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not going to stop. So here's probably where you're going to end up being. What does that mean for you today? I don't know. But for me, that train started running before I left California.
Hmm.
Um, and I was learning and growing and seeing things, questioning things, and so the transitions for me in really, translations, music, outreach, liturgy, structure, leadership style, all of that all the wheels started turning for me between probably 2012 and 2016, heavily
Hmm.
2014 to 16. One of the big crises that happened early on, philosophically and leadership wise, was when my leader, Pastor Chappell, had that physical breakdown from so many things that happened, and there was a lot going on there at that time. There was, goodness gracious, people were. Kerry Schmidt had cancer. Larry Chappell, his own son,
Yep.
had cancer. I mean,
Yep.
there's so much, and the pressure was so intense that, I mean, it knocked him out. I think for like 10 weeks, maybe in the spring of that year, 2011. And that was the year I preached his youth conference sermon at West
Hmm.
Coast, 2011. And things
Yep.
started changing for me. Things
Hmm.
started shifting. I started being involved in more leadership. That all happened that year. I started sitting on the platform. Um, at
I
the
remember that.
Remember that? I was just like all
Yeah.
of a sudden, I was just
Yeah. This is
there.
all during my junior,
Yeah.
senior year.
Then accreditation starts coming. I don't remember what year that was, shortly thereafter. But
Yeah.
all these things are leading me to some of the first transitions were leadership, philosophy, um, this life management, thinking about how I was going to, how I should do leadership myself, um, wanting more of a collaborative team uh, model rather than
Hmm.
a top down model. And admittedly, in my early days at River City, all I knew was top down model. So I didn't do that well. And I probably hurt some people along the way, I'm sure. But now that it's more fully fleshed out in my life, I can see where I started going and where I am now.
Hmm.
Then the second one for me was worship and stuff. And honestly, man, I was never a like stuffy high church music guy. That was never me. But I think in our world, you had this thing about CCM, which is almost a funny. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. Have you ever tried to use the phrase CCM like to somebody that's not from our world? They don't
Oh,
even.
yeah.
I don't even know what you're
Yeah,
talking
no, I
about.
mean seriously. Like, we'll go ahead and make this public knowledge on the podcast. I'm recently married,
Yay,
and
let's
I don't
go.
think, yeah, I don't think we've talked about it.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you,
Amazing
thank you.
opportunity and relationship God gave you. That's awesome, man.
Yes, yes, and really, it's a miracle. So I met my wife Ashley online on a dating app, and she had been living 10 years in New York City. She's originally from Ohio, but anyways, had been living in New York City and non-denominational. Some traces of Southern Baptist in her background, but non-denominational. Some of the terminology that I grew up with that I've used, she's what is that? So yeah, I remember the first time I said CCM around her. She goes, "What is that? Is that like a TV channel? Like, what are you talking about?" I said, "Oh, contemporary Christian music." She's like, "Contemporary Christian music? Like, what do you mean?" I was like, "Not hymns." She's like, "Oh, okay, all right,
Yeah.
yeah." So yes, it is one of those. It's beyond Christianese. It's independent Baptist
Oh my word.
insider language, big time.
Absolutely. And so, it was more like at that point, Southern gospel, I would listen to that. That was never an issue.
Mhm.
But because contemporary music, what they call contemporary Christian music, mainstream Christian bands, et cetera, was so looked down upon and so spoken against. But I remember starting to think, well, I don't know, man. I don't know how this holds water. I remember having a debate in one of my classes with Mike Herbster. I don't. You were probably gone by then. That was a
Yeah,
fun.
that was after. I would
He,
have loved to seen that.
he's ultra conservative, and maybe we should. I'll try to have Mike come on the podcast at some point
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I'd like him to share his perspective and hear us discuss it a little bit. Obviously we disagree, but he's very right wing when it comes to musical associations, the source of the music, who wrote it, its identification with the world sound,
Mm,
very symphonic orchestra, as far as its um, origins, and I mean it's they put timestamps on how long a song should be out before it's used
yeah,
in the church. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
yeah.
So that's my background. That's where I went to Bob Jones University. I was in very conservative independent Baptist churches for all those years. That's what I was, but inside and kind of in my mind, and ultimately, I was like, "There's no way." And then, of course, now as I have thought of more about, then started living it out. I think, I'm preaching tonight. We're recording this on a Wednesday. I'm preaching tonight on David's song in Second Samuel chapter 22, and the whole thing is about he's my rock, my salvation, my deliverer. David believed that. That's why he acted the way he did. He believed God was all these things. Now he's calling on God to help him. So it's not just cerebral. It's not just mental. It's action oriented. Same thing's true about all my positions and all the things that I've
Mm,
done. It starts up here. It starts in here, but it's going to lead. It's going to lead to action. So now, I just went to a Brandon Lake concert a couple months ago. It was amazing. It was an amazing concert. I've been to Winter Jam.
heathen.
Yeah, I know we go to Winter Jam every year. Our church goes. We took like 40 people from our church to Winter Jam.
Mm,
And I mean, these guys are sharing the gospel. I'm looking around. I remember looking around, just tears running down my face, of 30,000, people in this center, just mostly young people. We had the Irwins in concert at the last church advance, and they stayed over for Sunday. On that Sunday, one of our men that grew up in a legalistic IFB church, during the worship service with the Irwins, he literally got out of his seat, walked to me during the song, and just basically falls on me, hugs me, he's just weeping and thanking me for having the kind of church where he doesn't have to worry about that, and his kids
yeah.
and he can grow up in a free environment. And more than all just that feeling stuff is the fact that a lot of these people are really great believers with great testimonies and share the gospel with clarity. And you would think if you didn't come to this, that it's all about money, and none of them believe the gospel, and they're just like they're Satan's instruments to usher in, the one world church. I used to hear that. The
Oh
the
yeah.
the seeker friendly church will be the one world church, and CCM will be the music of the one world church, and
Yeah.
lay down. Well, it's kind of the tool whereby we lay down our arms of fundamentalism and all that, just all this.
Mm-hmm.
But my contention is this on transitioning music. First of all, there's latitude, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
every church is different, every believer is different. You've got to do what you believe in your conscience you're okay to do. So there's latitude there, and so don't do something. I shouldn't do something in my church that I don't think I should, because of my
Yeah.
conscience or whatever. But then at the same time, I think we are severely limiting our reach and our effectiveness by some man-made rule book about what worship should look like in the church. I
Mm-hmm.
do not believe at all that there is one singular right or wrong style of music. And I know some people just can't handle that.
Yeah.
And here's what here's I got two things to say about this. I just want to hear what you have to say too. But number one, where is the clear scripture reference that talks about the style of the music, like whether it's hip hop, country, style, bluegrass, orchestra? There's just not one.
Yeah.
In fact,
Well, that
yeah.
I've heard one of the arguments is all the instruments that Nebuchadnezzar used to get him to bow to the idol off limits.
Oh my
I don't
word.
even remember which one. I only remember sackbut because it's the King James. I don't even remember a psaltery and the sackbut. That's the
Yeah.
two I remember.
So you know what a
Horns.
sackbut is? Do you know what it is?
Thanks again for joining us for this episode, and we really would appreciate it if you could leave us that 5-star review, and then of course share this content with your friends. We want to help as many pastors and church leaders as we can, and be sure to of course follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you may listen to podcasts. And go ahead and subscribe to the Church Advance YouTube channel at youtube.com/@churchadvance. This podcast is hosted by Brian Sams. It is co-hosted and produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and the team at mustincrease.com. If you want to connect with Brian, be sure to head over to his website at briansams.com. Well, we really look forward to seeing you again in the next episode as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches right here on Church Advance with Brian Sams.